Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something that I'm sure you've heard of. It's called dopamine detoxing, and we're going to see if it lives into the hype. Is this actually a way to reset your brain and find more joy in life?
Right.
We're going to be taking all our information today from an article from BBC Science Focus magazine.
Okay.
It's called "It's Time to Change Your Relationship with Dopamine."
You know what? It really is time. It's, I think a lot of people are wondering, is our modern life, with all this instant gratification stuff,
Right.
actually making it harder to enjoy the simpler things?
Okay, so let's break down this whole dopamine thing first, because one of the things that this article pointed out that I found really interesting was that dopamine isn't really about enjoying things. It's more about wanting them.
It's wanting. Yeah, and the article talks about this study with rats.
Okay.
Where they blocked dopamine. And guess what? The rats still enjoyed their food. They just weren't motivated to go and get it.
Oh, so they didn't want it.
They didn't want it.
But once it was there, they're like, oh, that's pretty good.
Right. Yeah, they still enjoyed it, but they just weren't driven to seek it out.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of us have kind of thought about dopamine as like, the more dopamine, the more happy you are.
Yeah, the happiness molecule or something.
Right, and this is really showing it at its more nuanced than that.
It's way more complicated than that. And they even say in the article that other brain chemicals are more involved in that feeling of pleasure, like endorphins.
Oh, okay.
Endorphins are the ones that give you that kind of euphoric feeling.
Got it.
And there's even a Parkinson's drug called levodopa that boosts dopamine, but it doesn't make patients happier.
So it's not like a one-to-one thing.
No, it's not that straightforward.
Okay, now we have to talk about addiction because that's where I think dopamine really gets this bad rap.
Definitely.
The article does say that chronic drug use can really mess with your dopamine system and make it hard to feel pleasure.
Yeah, and they talk about nicotine specifically and how it can lead to something called anhedonia.
Anhedonia? What is that?
Anhedonia basically means you lose the ability to enjoy things that used to make you happy.
Oh, wow.
It could be a real problem for people trying to quit smoking. It's thought to be because nicotine jacks up your dopamine levels so high that when you take it away, your brain has a hard time adjusting back to normal.
So you're used to that really high level of stimulation all the time.
Exactly.
So it makes you wonder if powerful drugs can do that to our dopamine system. What about the stuff we do every day?
Right.
You know, like checking our phones, constantly scrolling through social media.
All those things that give us quick hits of stimulation.
Could that be messing with our brains too?
Well, the article seems to think that our everyday habits probably aren't as powerful as those drugs that really directly target our brain chemistry.
Okay. But even if the science isn't super clear yet about this whole dopamine reset thing, could there still be some benefits to doing a dopamine detox?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's not literally resetting your dopamine levels, there's got to be something else going on, right?
Yeah, like if you're cutting back on junk food and getting more sleep.
That's got to be good for you.
Those are good things for you, no matter what's happening on a chemical level.
Exactly.
So maybe the framework itself is helpful, even if the reasoning behind it isn't totally accurate.
I think that's a really good point.
But the article did mention that there's not a ton of research specifically on the effects of cutting out things like social media or shopping.
Right. They did mention one study from 2014 where they sent a bunch of preteens to a device-free summer camp.
Oh, wow.
And they found that those kids actually got better at reading people's emotions compared to the kids who didn't go to the camp.
Interesting.
But even that study wasn't super rigorous. So it's hard to say for sure.
So what is really happening when people do these dopamine detox things? Why are they finding them helpful?
Well, the article suggests that it might have more to do with breaking bad habits.
Okay.
It founds about how habits form through this loop called the cue behavior reward loop.
Okay, I'm listening.
So let's say you're trying to cut back on social media. Feeling bored might be the cue, reaching for your phone is the behavior, and then the reward is that little dopamine hit you get from seeing something interesting or whatever.
Right. Okay, so by completely abstaining from that reward during a detox, you're kind of breaking that link in the chain.
Exactly.
You're resetting those associations.
You're hitting the reset button on those autopilot behaviors.
So it's more about making conscious choices.
Yes.
Instead of just running on autopilot all the time.
And the article even mentions using blocking apps.
Oh, yeah.
As a way to help weaken those associations. because they literally block you from accessing those tempting things.
So it's not really about manipulating dopamine directly. It's about being more intentional with your actions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about dopamine and how it relates to our habits. But what about the potential downsides of dopamine detoxing? What about alternative approaches and creating a version of this that actually works for you?
That's what we'll cover next.
Before we all jump on this dopamine detox train, the article did mention a couple of things to watch out for.
Like what?
Like cutting yourself off from something you actually really enjoy
Yeah.
could kind of backfire.
You know, it's like when you're on a diet and all you can think about is that piece of cake you're not supposed to have.
Yeah.
It's called the rebound effect.
Oh.
The forbidden fruit becomes even more tempting,
Okay.
and you might end up binging even harder when you finally give in.
So maybe going cold turkey on everything isn't the best approach?
Probably not.
What does the article say we should do instead?
Well, they recommend experimenting and finding what works best for you. You know, instead of complete abstinence, maybe try setting some reduction goals.
Okay.
So let's say you spend 3 hours a day on social media.
That's a lot.
It is. So try cutting it back to 2.
So instead of saying, I'm never going to look at this again,
Right.
it's just like, okay, I'm going to scale back a little bit.
Exactly. It's about finding something you can actually stick with.
Sustainable. Yeah.
You know what? I think this is a good opportunity to reframe this whole dopamine detox thing.
Okay.
It's not about demonizing dopamine or trying to completely eliminate it.
Okay.
It's about understanding how it influences our habits and using that knowledge to be more aware of our choices.
I like that. It's less about punishment. It's more like a mindful reset.
Mindful reset. I love that. Like you're hitting the pause button.
Yeah.
Taking stock of those autopilot behaviors and deciding if they're really serving you.
Yeah. And maybe instead of reaching for your phone every time you have a free minute, you take a couple of deep breaths,
Right.
You go for a walk, you actually talk to another human being.
You know, find activities that nourish you, that give you a sense of accomplishment.
And that's going to be different for everybody.
Of course, what works for one person might not work for another.
Right.
It's all about experimenting and finding what resonates with you.
You know, for some people, it might be social media.
Yeah.
For some people, it might be junk food.
It could be anything, really.
The point is to be mindful of how your choices make you feel.
Exactly.
You know, this whole conversation has really changed how I think about dopamine detoxing.
Yeah.
It's not about being super strict. It's about finding little changes that you can actually maintain.
And those small changes can make a big difference in your overall well-being.
So we've talked about the science, we've talked about the downsides, we've talked about how to make this work for you. But how does all of this relate to you, our listener?
Well, I think the big takeaway here is that we can choose to control our technology and our habits instead of letting them control us.
That's powerful.
It is about finding that balance where we can enjoy the good stuff without letting it take over.
And it's really important to remember that dopamine is not the bad guy.
No, it's not.
It's part of how our brains are wired, but we just got to learn how to manage it.
Right. There's no quick fix or magic formula for happiness or productivity.
It's about figuring out what works for you.
So as we lap things up, we want to leave you with a little something to think about.
If you were going to design your own kind of detox, based on everything we've talked about today, what would you include and why?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, I think if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the technology and all the habits and stuff, just becoming more aware of them is a really good place to start.
How do you do that?
Well, you could try keeping a little journal for like a few days.
Okay.
And track how much time you're spending on social media or watching TV or whatever it is you think you want to cut back on.
Just write it all down.
Yeah, just write it down, and you might be surprised by what you find.
You might be like, whoa, I had no idea I was spending that much time doing that.
And then once you have a better idea of what your patterns are, you can start experimenting with some little changes.
Like what?
Well, setting some limits on your screen time, maybe, or having certain times of day that are totally tech-free.
Oh, like no phone zones.
Yeah, exactly. Or finding things that you really enjoy doing that make you feel good.
So it's more about focusing on the good stuff rather than just depriving yourself of stuff.
Exactly. You're not punishing yourself.
Right.
You're just choosing to spend your time differently.
And that's why, even though this whole dopamine detox thing might not be perfect from a scientific standpoint, I can see how it could be really helpful for breaking those bad habits.
It gives you a framework for understanding how your brain works.
Yeah.
And then you can use that knowledge to make better choices for yourself.
So to wrap things up for everyone listening, we really dove deep today into this whole world of dopamine. We talked about the science behind detoxing, and we even busted some myths along the way.
So myths were busted?
I hope that this has given you some new things to think about and maybe inspired you to take a look at your own habits and how they're affecting you.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us on another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.